Well, pull up a chair and set a spell here at Tales from SYL Ranch Live, the vlogcast that reminds you to always know where your towel is. And I'm your host, Bill Stone. And tonight on Tales from SYL Ranch, we have the Fandi Masters mini review of Season 2, Episode 2 of the ORVILLE, Primal Urges. And so to explain my show for the benefit of new viewers or people who might not come in right at the top of the hour, give you a chance to get in here before I do my review, I do live reviews. Sometimes I do serious films and TV, sometimes I do schlock, and sometimes I do films or TV with a broad appeal, like the ORVILLE. I will take any and all questions, comments, and nasty remarks. You can tell me if I missed something, if I'm completely full of crap, or if I just happen to be an amazingly hoopy fruit, which is probably more likely. I go into a lot more depth than most reviewers. I don't just say if I liked a film or not. I go into the acting, the direction, the cinematography, some of the mechanics of making a film. And I could do that because a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I was once an actor, so I can speak with some authority. Not as much authority as a modern working actor, never ever want to give that impression, but with some authority. As they often say, those who can do, and those who can't teach. My ORVILLE reviews, however, are mini reviews. I don't go into nearly as much depth because I make these reviews the day after the ORVILLE. But I think you're going to find that I still go into a lot more depth than most reviewers, particularly on YouTube. So as a non-spoiler review for this episode, I can say that it was okay. It was pretty good. There were some parts, some rather big parts, that I could have gone my entire life without ever knowing, and knowing them actually detracted from my enjoyment of the episode. I was generally left feeling uncomfortable. There was some humor. It wasn't amazingly funny, and I'm starting to see signs of what I call, and had called on the Next Generation and on, the original series problem, which I'll talk about in some detail. Mostly, however, I was left uncomfortable because of all this stuff that I could have lived without ever knowing. So it's pretty good. Just go into this knowing that you're going to know the details of something that may very well make you uncomfortable. So I guess, that being the non-spoiler review, I will go ahead and issue myself a...
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. All hands, prepare for incoming spoilers.
Yes, it is a spoiler alert, and that is because I am the Fandi Master, and that means that the fandom is strong with me, and that means that nothing is new, nothing is original, and at worst, I figure it out about a half an hour too early. This is not a boast or a brag. This is sadly where you find yourself after having watched, read, and listened to about 100 years' worth of science fiction. You just can't see the new stuff for the century that came before, and you discover there isn't that much that's new in the world, and it will sometimes interfere with your ability to enjoy things. Not so much this time around. This time I was left uncomfortable, and that's why I didn't enjoy it that much. So to talk about the episode itself, see if I can get my sight line right. Talking about the episode itself, I oftentimes in my longer reviews will go through and do the entire plot of something. This being a mini review, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to assume that if you sat with me past that spoiler alert, then you either saw the thing or you don't care that it's about to be completely spoiled for you. Hey, Larry, how are you doing? Can always count on you. So I'm not going to go into the plot so much. If you saw it, you know what it is. If you didn't see it, you don't care that I'm going to spoil the whole episode for you. I always like to get my cringe moments out of the way. As I said at the non-spoiler review, I could have gone my entire life not knowing the details of Bortus's porn. It was, for me, too much information. It was like knowing the details of my parents' or my grandparents' sex life. It was TMI. And it's why after the first viewing, because I did watch it several times with some stuff I liked, I skipped over those moments. And the interesting thing was it still worked. It still worked. You did not have to indulge that level of detail for the story to still work. If anybody ever does a fan edit of this, I would suggest getting rid of most of the details of Bortus's porn. Yep, remember, it's from Scum and Villainy. I know they thought it was supposed to be funny. And I suspect that for people significantly younger than me, it may be funny. You know, people who send foul-mouthed lunatics to the Congress and the Senate, probably they'll find it more funny than I did. Me, I just went, I did not need to know that. I really didn't need to know that. So that part of it I dislike. Larry says, I'm guessing they're the Klingons in this show. Kind of. They're sort of, I think it's kind of, they've got two different things going on. I think Bortus is like a combination of Spock and Klingons. And Isaac is a combination of Spock and Data. So there's some crossover there. But yeah, I think they sort of are in a way. The couples therapy that they had, this is probably because I have some experience with this, and I also have several immediate family members who are in the psychological profession. That all sounded just like something like a bunch of hippies would come up with, and I really didn't like it. It totally left me in the cold. It did not seem realistic to me. A lottery is not the appropriate way to decide who lives and who dies on that planet. There is a reason that you take the children and the women first, in that order. And it doesn't have anything to do with chivalry or sexism. It is entirely 100% sterile and practical. You load up on the children every time. To begin with, it's going to be lower mass. If the shuttle can carry a mass of 30 adults, then it should be able to take more children. So what if they don't have a place to sit? You know, I'll be happy to stack them on top of each other if that's what it takes. And you also take the kids for a simple and sterile reason. They are the breeding stock. When they reach maturity, they will be the ones to create the next generation. That's why you take the children. Their look and their voices are Klingon. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's tons and tons of similarities there, obviously. And I'm sure it's intentional. But to me, they also have bits and pieces from time to time that will remind me of Vulcans. You know, they're pretty. I mean, you know, all of their sociological things aside, they're pretty unemotional most of the time. So, now, after you have loaded up with all the children, then you start taking the women, specifically women from about 18 to 25 years old, because they're the ones more likely to mate, and the younger that they are, the safer that it is, and the more time that there is for them to do it in. The reason you don't have women and children in a war is very damn simple, and it has nothing to do with sexism. If you have a war that goes really badly, and the United States has not had one that's gone badly since the Civil War. If you have a war that goes really badly, and you only take men, that means that you will be able to recover. You will have a generation of men who can, if necessary, get multiple women pregnant, and you will rebuild your population. If you start taking women, well, if you have a war that goes badly, you're cooked. If you start taking children, then you don't have a next generation at all. It is why in these circumstances you always take the children and the women first in that order. It is totally sterile and clinical, has nothing to do with sexism, has to do with preserving your race. There were some great moments. I think the fact that they were only able to rescue 30 people was well done, and interesting to see how it impacted Bortus. However, that part of it was kind of predictable to me. You know, the moment that we had people there, I went, oh, okay, this is going to involve Bortus going over there, and he's going to learn something from it and go back, and everything's going to be better in his marriage. It just sort of looked like that to me. The plot device of watching a planet break up when its star expands, I thought was very cool. Very good idea. We've never seen something like that on television. I have actually done this in the game called Universe Sandbox, which is available on Steam if you have the hardware to run it, which I no longer do. Get that one. It's a very fun game. I set stuff up all the time where I'm slamming Jupiter-sized planets into the sun at faster than the speed of light, you know, just to watch the giant explosion and everything. So I've done this. I've done this in a game where I set it up so that the sun starts to expand, or you know, the Earth's orbit shifts too far slightly in towards the sun, and it starts to boil everything away down to the bedrock of the planet. So I get a kick out of that. So, writer on this, always right to call out the writer first. Without a good writer, you do not have squat. You can have all the great people, as they often do in this show, but without a good story, you ain't got nothing. The writer on this one is Wellesley Wild. Now, I did do some reviews of Star Trek, of the Orville last year, towards the tail end of the season. I did not go through a lot of people's IMDb's at that time, and I'm going to start doing that some. You'll see a bunch of it this time because it's kind of first time around for some of these people, but I won't do it after that. It will be a one-time thing for somebody, and then I won't do it again. But there's some stuff that's interesting to point out here. The writer is Wellesley Wild. His IMDb, is 1999 to 2020 so far, with 12 writer credits. 19 episodes of Dada is one of those writer credits. 13 episodes of Family Guy is one of those credits. And 51 episodes of The Late Late Show with Craig Kilborn are one of those credits, and that was his first gig. He also has 9 producer credits, a couple of which I'm kind of interested in. One is announced for the new Animaniacs TV series for 2020. Hope that means they're going to do something good with it and aren't just going back to the well, because that's what the millennials remember. They'll also be doing he's also got one in post, which is an untitled Ren and Stimpy short. I loved Ren and Stimpy. I hope that this will be good. He also has 173 episodes of Family Guy, and not surprisingly here, we're seeing some crossover, and 13 episodes so far of The Orville, in which he is credited as the co-executive producer. Orville Bridge is all windows. Yes, it is, which the only problem with doing that is, from where that bridge is situated, you should be able to see a fair percentage of the front of the ship out that window. They did that in the Abrams Star Trek movies, and it was the first time when you looked out one of those windows you actually saw the bow of the ship, which you should be able to see a fair chunk of here. It becomes a problem anytime that they have... You know, it always used to strike me in Star Trek The Next Generation, the conference lounge, right? Where that situation, you should see nothing but a giant plane of the aft part of the primary hull, and then the engines and all that. It should be visible right out the window, and it never was. So they kind of have to watch that here. But yeah, I do get a kick out of it. It's more like Abrams versus Windows with, displays layered on top of it. I kind of like that. Now, Wellesley Wild has got 3 Primetime Emmy nominations, all for The Family Guy. And his writing here is fine. It is a well-structured episode, well put together. There's nothing wrong with that. I just didn't need to know the specifics of Bortus's porn. I just didn't need to know that. Characters, well, of course, Seth MacFarlane as Captain Ed Mercer. This is not Ed's episode, really. He has a lot of reacting and kind of ordering to do, but and has some good humor along with that. What humor I think is okay is comes in that. It's not in knowing the porn and laughing at the porn. That's just uncomfortable to me. But Ed going, I can't believe I'm even having this problem. I got a guy who tried to kill his husband, and why do I have this problem? I can't. It's one line. I can't live on a ship with normal people. So that sort of thing I like as the humor here. I didn't like knowing the details of the porn. That just seemed like, Larry says, TMI, too much information, too much like knowing the details of my parents' or grandparents' sex lives. I just don't need to know. Then we have this is one I didn't know until I went to do this. Let's see if I can get a... Yeah, there I am. I'm back in focus. Of course, is Commander Kelly Grayson, Adrian Pilicki. I did not know this until I happened to catch it this time around. I bet you don't know there was a pilot for a Wonder Woman TV series, I think it was for CBS, that was not bought. She played Wonder Woman in that pilot. So if you can go find it, I think it's on YouTube. It's okay. It's not great. I can see why they didn't buy it. But in any case, she does a great performance here as Commander Grayson. Again, not her episode, but she, a fair amount of reacting and, barking orders and stuff for her to do mostly. There is a moment, however, that struck me when they're coming into the sick bay, right after the commercial break, and they come back in and Bortus is laying her on the table. Because of the angle that they got, and I'm going to talk about that angle specifically, because of the angle that they got, there was a look into her eye that really struck me for some reason. I thought was very well played. It was her going, I can't believe that this is happening, and, what in the hell, we've had to have this person's husband rounded up and stuck in a brig, and now we have to worry about this, guy dying on us. So I thought that was good. Aside from that, it's not her episode, really, and so there's not a whole hell of a lot here to do for her. Larry says, first officer really looks like Denise Richards. I hadn't really thought about that specifically. I don't really have any strong recollection that much about what Denise Richards looks like. She does, I guess she does. It's been so long since I've seen a movie with her. I guess I remember in Starship Troopers. Yeah, she kind of does. She kind of does. Although, she has a problem that Denise Richards never had to deal with when she was at least in the big public eye in acting, which is she's in 1080p. I'll talk about it when it comes to the makeup, but 1080p is such a killer. She's got 2 or 3 minor facial imperfections that in 1080p just jump out at you, and you can't help it. It doesn't, she's still a very beautiful woman, but it's one of those deals where, as somebody who has been watching this definition get better and better and better, I look at it and go, geez, the tiniest imperfections show up on 1080p. It's horrible. Anyway, not her story, really, but did have what I thought was a good moment as they come into the sick bay, and she's got this look in her eye. You only really see half of her face, but she's got a look in her eye that really struck me for some reason. And as Penny Johnson as Dr. Claire Finn. Just FYI, I have been watching this actress for a long time. I remember her back from when she was in the Larry Sanders Show as Larry's secretary. I've sort of been following her ever since. And, of course, she did Deep Space Nine and all kinds of other stuff. Oh, good. Yeah, well, we got a 6 Degrees of Star Trek. What a shock. We got a lot of those on this show. Not Claire's episode, again. Last episode was more closer to hers, but not a bad performance. This is one of those times where you get to see her in an emergency situation medically, and she works fine that way. It was not her fault that a bunch of hippies came up with what they thought couples counseling was really like when it isn't. She pulls it off as well as anybody could under those circumstances. And then we have Scott Grimes as Lieutenant Malloy. Also not his episode. Very much not his episode. His whole deal is, being on the bridge and doing his thing as the helmsman. He's really doesn't have a whole hell of a lot else to do. He's got a couple of funny lines. He's got one about masturbation that I could have lived without. Again, TMI, guys, TMI. But he's got one line that made it into the commercial in the trailer. I'd say about 30 seconds, we're going to be a baked potato. Okay, that was funny. But really not a lot to do aside from be the navigator. Look scared and sweaty and all that. So not his episode, really. Peter Macon as Lieutenant Commander Bortus. Well, this is obviously one of his episodes. He does fine here. There's a problem always with actors when they have this much facial appliance, which is how do you emote through it? I've said before, it started with the Klingons in Star Trek when they first got ridges on their heads, and then the ridges went crazy, and then you got Star Trek Discovery where the Klingons are like freaking Queen Alien almost. And so we have a similar situation here where he has really only got his eyes and this part around his mouth that isn't covered with an appliance. So what do? You don't have a face. Yeah, and through a helmet. Oh, sure. That headpiece might as well be a helmet. It just covers his whole head. And nothing but this and this are real. The rest of it is surrounded by makeup appliances, and how do you emote through that? I think he does as well as anyone can, and that may be part of the reason why they've made this race kind of unemotional. Not that they can't get emotional, but they're generally kind of, laid back and stuff. He doesn't get too uptight or excited about things, at least not on duty. He does as good a job as anybody could. I thought, the very end was a good moment for him, and it allowed him to use his eyes. You can see it in his eyes to do his acting, which is great. I mean, if you can get something out through all of that, you're doing really good. I'd be curious to know what his performance might look like. Was he not underneath all of that latex and stuff? But he does a good job regardless. You can tell that he is being impacted by the fact that he can only save less than half of the people that he's sent there to save. And obviously that rolls forward into the resolution of his story here. And he does a good job with it, don't get me wrong. It's just that he is faced with a damn near insurmountable task of trying to act with only your eyes and your mouth. Halston Sage as Lieutenant Allarakha Tan. Interesting things. When I go out and find these pictures, I am not intentionally looking for pictures like this that are showing lots of cleavage and stuff. I'm looking for pictures that make the actor or actress look good. And what happens when you go looking for Halston Sage pictures is you see a lot of this. I have to wonder whether this isn't a reaction to the fact that in Orville they are clearly costuming her and giving her makeup that makes her look much, much younger. So a lot of public appearances that she's in, you're going to find outfits like this. This one just happened to be one that I picked, and I pick them so that I try to make them look good. It's not just about all the cleavage. If you look at some of the other ones taking that same event, I think this is the best one of the bunch. It makes her look good. Larry says, the planet dying and rescuing unknown people seems like a previous Star Trek episode. It's certainly something that I don't know that I don't think we've had I guess, let's see, the planet breaking up. There was one where the planet was breaking up, in the original series. There may be something similar to this. I know there's an episode of Next Gen where Data saves somebody he's not supposed to because of the Prime Directive. It's not a new concept. The notion that, we have it here is, to some extent, just so that we can give Bortus something that impacts his use of porn all the time. I can't say that I was too terribly surprised. When I knew what was going to happen, I was not shocked. When he was going over, I thought, okay, something's going to happen there and something will impact him. Wasn't particularly surprised. But not a bad way to do things in any case. I would have directed it differently, and I'm going to talk about that when I talk about the original series problem in a bit. And the directing it differently would have directly impacted how much of this would have seemed more new, I guess. Also not her episode particularly. She only gets one line that's kind of interesting, which is, "I'd rather stay, Captain, in case there's any divorces," which is a funny little line. Jay Lee as Lamarr, also not his episode. This is him doing his job as the chief engineer and having a couple of funny one-liners. But mostly just there to look scared, to react, do things like that. So not his episode, does fine with what he's got here. He is a secondary character this time around. Wait a minute, I did this wrong. Yeah, okay. Then Isaac Mark Jackson, also not particularly his episode, mostly here to do his thing as a science officer and, to be with the other guy who goes down on that to the planet, which, makes sense. And I do like that when they get him into, places like this, he isn't going around being holier than thou constantly. When he tells them that they're not only going to be able to save 30 people, that comes off as real to me and not something like, we can only save 30 of you, but don't worry, it's not a big deal. There's stupid life forms like you out there all over the place. He doesn't do anything like that. It's reasonably understated, gets that this is the end of their civilization. So, is the series a satire or an homage? I think it is at times both. I think it's at times both. This notion of, VR porn like that, it's something that we're going to start to run into very shortly, have started to. And it's also something that was heavily implied, particularly in Deep Space Nine, that the holodecks were capable of doing this sort of thing. And at that level, I didn't mind because I didn't have to know the details. You heard some things, but you didn't know the details. This was far too detailed. But is it a satire or an homage? I think it is a bit of both. I think it is a bit of both. There's some satire going on here. This, I think, is satire of all those Star Trek episodes with Next Gen and Deep Space Nine and later with holodecks that can do anything. But it begs the issue, if you're doing from today's standpoint, won't there be virtual porn of that kind? And yeah, there probably will be. Just didn't even know the details, guys. Porn drove home video. Well, porn has driven everything technologically. It drove home video, and it completely drove the growth of the internet. Everything else aside, there's a great song by a parody called Avenue Q that is a parody of Sesame Street, and they do a song called The Internet is for Porn. And as someone who spent 40 years in that industry, I can tell you, yes, the internet growth was driven more by pornography than anything else. It is an ongoing thing and will continue to be an ongoing thing, I assume, forever. It's just the way things are. But again, I don't need to know the details of your porn. And trust me, I'm never telling you the details of mine. It is too much information. Thank you. Then as Clyden is Chad L. Coleman. Does another good performance here. I find it interesting in as much as the only stuff that I'm interested in their relationship is the fact that it is two men from a planet that are nothing but males, and the gender roles they tend to play. And it sort of seems to be sort of back and forth from time to time with the two of them. So I find that interesting. The fact that he comes off, it's so hard to get. Bortus looks like he's the bottom in this relationship. And at the same time, sometimes Clyden comes off as, in this episode, as like a really frustrated male. And sometimes he comes off as more of a female. So that part of it is interesting to me, seeing how that works within a species like this. Don't need to know the details of the porn. And he does a good job at that throughout. Does a very good job at that. There's one other person I'm going to mention who isn't in this episode. Michaela McManus, who plays Lieutenant Janelle Tyler. We saw her introduced last week. I called her in the last episode the new hot chick. Proving once again that a Fandi master can learn. My viewer, Cartoon Fan 959, noticed something that I didn't about Tyler. She played the Krill to Leia in the Season 1 episode Krill. She was the teacher in that one, the one that survived. Cartoon Fan 959 also noticed that Ed mentioned a Krill invasion just before she came down to sit down and have a drink with him. Maybe some foreshadowing. And the first thing she asked was for course information and navigational information. Checked out that stuff. And at least on screen, Alara did not check her security clearance. Now, the Union has this technology that can make them basically look like a Krill. Maybe the Krill have a similar technology. And with that in mind, I think we can imagine that there is some Krill stuff coming up. Mercer will get involved with Tyler, and at the appropriate moment, she will betray the ship to the Krill. So, Cartoon Fan 959, well spotted on that one. Didn't see it myself, and after it was pointed out to me, I went, oh, well, Here's another prediction I can make as a Fandi master. Now, the production aspects of this one. This is where we're going to see a little bit more in terms of IMDb. The director here is Kevin Hooks. His IMDb is 1969 to 2019. He was born in 1958, so he's been doing this a long time. He has 91 director credits, 21 actor credits, one of which is for 13 episodes of He's the Mayor, in which he played the titular character. 54 episodes of The White Shadow as Morris Thorpe. His first role was T.J. Gamble on the movie T.J. in 1969 at the age of 11. He looks a little bit to me like a child actor who transitioned, went into both producing and directing, and does still get some acting roles. He also has 13 producer credits with multiple TV shows, multiple episodes, including, by the way, the producer credits on the 2003 series Dragnet. That is the Dragnet that starred Ed O'Neill as Joe Friday. It's a very good show. All of the episodes are on here. If you've only ever seen Ed O'Neill in Married with Children, he's not the first guy you'd think of as playing Joe Friday, but he does a really good job. Now, the series doesn't have anything else going for it, unfortunately. By then, that whole genre that had been created by Jack Webb in the 1940s and 50s had been completely used by every other police procedural up to the present day. And so there isn't really anything about Dragnet in 2003 that makes it stand out from anything else that was on TV in that time with a police procedural. But it is fun to watch Ed O'Neill because he is a very good Joe Friday. Now, Kevin Hooks has won awards. He has won a Primetime Emmy in 2000 for Outstanding Children's Program for The Color of Friendship, and he has 13 other nominations. His direction here is fine. Both this and the cinematography suffer badly from something that I call the original series problem. And again, I'm going to talk about that basically after I get done with the production stuff because it hits so many different aspects of production. And while I find his direction fine, I think there's nothing wrong with it. I also think that you can think in different terms on this show than necessarily have to when doing something like Star Trek in the Berman era, the Rick Berman era. As I say, it suffers from what I call the original series problem. And again, I'll talk about that in a bit. Cinematographer, a name we have seen a million times in Star Trek, Marvin V. Rush. His IMDb presently goes 1978 to 2019 with 27 direct cinematographer credits. They have to label every episode season 2 on screen, do they? Well, I wouldn't be shocked. There hasn't been much difference, but that's not the original series problem. Anyway, Marvin Rush has 27 cinematographer credits, 12 of which are for the Orville, 50 of which, one of those credits translates into 50 episodes of Hell on Wheels. Another one translates into 93 episodes of Star Trek Enterprise, 162 episodes of Star Trek Voyager, 45 episodes of Deep Space Nine, and 78 episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. He also has 10 camera and electrical department credits, with 5 director credits, 2 of which were for episodes of Enterprise, which included In a Mirror Darkly Part 2, which is one of my favorite episodes. Also 2 episodes of Voyager, and 1 episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. He has 4 nominations for awards, all of which were Star Trek of some kind. His cinematography seriously suffers from the original series problem. Again, I'm going to get into it in a big way. I haven't talked about it before, but it is something that plagued Star Trek all the way through until the J.J. Abrams era. And J.J. didn't get lots of other stuff right about Star Trek. But he did managed to break it out of most of the problems associated with what I call the original series problem. Marvin Rush is particularly noticeable on this. I see the stamp of his cinematography all over this episode because it is so much like what we've seen in prior Star Trek. And not surprisingly, he did a lot of Star Trek, obviously, but it's so much the same. And that, all looking the way that it does with cinematography, owes its way back all the way to Star Trek, the original series, which is why I call it the original series problem. So I'll talk about cinematography and some specifics about what I mean about that when I talk about the original series problem. And of course, with 6 degrees of Star Trek, well, duh. Obviously has a lot. John Debney is responsible for the music on this one. His is weird. He was born in 1956. He has a credit in 1954. 2 years before he was born. Now, posthumous credits I have seen before. Prehumous credits I have not. I don't know what's going on there. The space scenes look like Star Trek for sure. Yes, I have a very specific thing that I can talk about with regards to that. Yes. Yes. Several very specific things that I'm going to talk about with that. His real IMDb is 1980 to 2018. That's when he actually started working. He's a worker. He has 203 composer credits. So far, 7 episodes of The Orville, 10 episodes of Santa Clarota Diet, and numerous other TV shows with multiple episodes. He also did Star Trek The Next Generation episode, The Pegasus, Star Trek Deep Space Nine episodes, The Nagus, and Progress. He also has 97 music department credits, which includes the Doctor Who Online Adventures, for which he was Ranger for 46 episodes on, and has 42 soundtrack credits. Now, the first one, that 2 years prehumous one, in 1954, was for The Magical World of Disney, for the music Welcome to Disney's Wonderful World. Yet he hadn't been born for 2 years. I have no idea where this comes from. Maybe it's just a mistake. He has done quite a wide range of genres, both of film and television. He's won a bunch of awards. He won the Primetime Emmy in 1991, 1994, 1997 for Outstanding Achievement in Music Composition for a Series, Dramatic Underscore, or for a main title theme music several times for different films. He has won the ASCAP Film and Music Television Music Awards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 fracking times. All for essentially top box office films, which means they did a lot of business, and you would recognize the names of a lot of these if I went through them. I know it did last summer. Liar, Liar, Inspector Gadget, the movie, Cats and Dogs, Princess Diaries, Spy Kids, Scorpion King, Snow Dogs, Spy Kids 2, Bruce Almighty, Elf, etc. One of the interesting ones, Passion of the Christ. Running through here, Hannah Montana, the movie, Iron Man 2, Hatfields and McCoys, Ice Age and Ice Age 2, The Jungle Book fairly recently, and, of course, The Orville. He's won it for. Seth MacFarlane got a list of Star Trek personnel from his show's production. I think to some extent, yes. I think between he and Brandon Braga, who is also an exec producer on this show, yeah, I think he wanted to make the show that answers the question, original series or Next Generation. Well, Kirk, but Next Generation. He wanted to make Next Generation with Kirk, and that's what he's doing. Okay, music on this one. This music also, to some extent, suffers from the original series problem. One of the things that I wasn't aware of until I happened to go look at this is they do use a 75-piece orchestra for each of the music. And there will be a soundtrack album for Season 1 released in a couple 3 weeks on January 22nd, rather. The music was okay. There is nothing that really jumped out at me as amazing, but neither was there anything that didn't fit. Of everything I heard, I would have to say that the bit that comes at the beginning of the sickbay sequence I thought was very good. Not so much everything else. It suffers from the original series problem. But otherwise, that bit, again, it was all stuff that was coming together. The cinematography was doing something interesting on there, but I'm going to talk about that too when it comes to the original series problem. And the music was doing something there, and we got that look in Kelly's eye that I thought was very nice. The production designer is by Stephen J. Lineweaver. He is not any relationship to Brad Lineweaver, the science fiction author. What is the ship's design based on? I don't think necessarily that's based on anything Star Trek related, although there are certainly callbacks to the way those engines work and the effect is, the special effect that they use for, activating the quantum drive, definitely a lot of influences here. I don't know necessarily that the ship's design is based on anything particularly. I'd have to see what, the backstage was. I've never looked. So I don't know that it's necessarily based on anything Next Gen or Star Trek-wise. It does, however, still suffer from the original series problem, which I'll talk about later. Stephen J. Lineweaver is no relationship to the science fiction author Brad Lineweaver. In fact, they're not even spelled right. His IMDb currently goes 1984 to 2019 with 41 production designer credits, one of which translates into 26 episodes of the Orville so far. He's also got 5 art director credits, which includes, by the way, the film Dirty Dancing, if you're old enough to remember that. He did that one. And he did largely films until about 2017. He's also won the Rainier Independent Film Festival Award in 2014, audience favorite for A Bit of Bad Luck. Looks like an aquatic creature. Oh, you mean him standing there? Oh, it is so hard to even find pictures of people like this. Oh, you mean the ship? Yeah, it does sort of. It does sort of remind you of a fish or something like that. Yeah, that may be what they're aiming for in this one. Yeah, it may very well be. They've decided to go off from. I like it better than, say, the redesigned Enterprise for the Abrams-verse. I think it's a bit more creative and has some interesting and fairly sleek lines to it. And it's also to some extent a callback to 1950s rockets. The shape of the thing in general. Not forgetting about the back end, but the front end looks like your average V2 rocket kind of. So. Visual effects. Oh, wait. Speaking of the production design here, mostly using existing sets, not surprisingly. So there's not a ton of production design involved here. There's a little bit that also suffers from the original series problems. Yeah, a little more aerodynamic. I don't think it's really aerodynamic. You got into an atmosphere, I think you'd be in trouble without anti-gravs. But yeah, it's shaped more like, a 1950s rocket would be shaped, and I'm sure that's intentional as well. Luke McDonald is the visual effects supervisor. The super effects are done more or less by an army of people. I pull him out just because he's got the title. His IMDb is presently 1999 to present with 29 visual effects credits, 13 of which for the Orville. He was also on Star Trek Beyond. He was visual effects consultant for Kelvin Optical, which I assume is one of the companies that they farmed out some of the effects to. He did exclusively film until the Orville and has 2 nominations. Let's see. The effect. That alien engineer, I don't remember the name, but the alien engineer, the really odd-looking alien engineer, kind of like a bug or something, a very large one or something, did not hold up well under 1080p. It was okay when you saw him from the side. The moment he turned toward the camera, that's when it started to not go well. Aside from that, there's nothing wrong with any of the special effects. I liked what he was doing in terms of, things like the planet breaking up in various stages, the various special effects that we got on the planet, and the things happening to the Orville when they lost control and all that. I thought that was great. Excuse me. But, to some extent, these special effects suffer from the original series problem, which I will have to talk. Doctor Who critter, yes, in a way, yeah, except that I think this one was more CGI. They actually do a fair number of practical monsters on Doctor Who. This one struck me when I saw it in 1080p and it turned toward me. I went, oh, that looks like CGI. It's a problem with 1080p. It is a fracking problem with 1080p. You have, as always, every single time you do one of these, they have operate under 3 restrictions: time, talent, and money. Time, they always have too little of. Talent, they've got quite a lot of here. Money, not bad. But, if you're going to render something that's going to stand up in 1080p and as CGI, it takes time and it takes money. So, maybe sometimes you have to cut a corner here or there. 6 Degrees of Star Trek. Well, duh, he's done Star Trek Beyond. The costumer... You know, a lot of times I can't find pictures for people that are, you know, costumers and stuff like that that are from older films. Every once in a while you get lucky, and boy, did I get lucky on this one. This is the costumer Joseph Perot. He's got a lot of pictures like that one. His IMDb goes currently 1985 to present with 46 costume designer credits, one of which translates into 8 episodes of The Mandalorian, the new Star Wars TV show that's filming. Also currently 13 episodes of The Orville, 23 episodes of Salem, 41 episodes of The Ghost Whisperer. He also did the 1994 film Stargate, Independence Day, and the 1998 remake of The Blob, which I have seen. Yeah, okay, well, whatever. He also has 7 costume and wardrobe department credits and did largely film until 2005 and has done mostly television ever since, with 4 award nominations. Abrams' Star Trek isn't in my Star Trek universe. Well, I think it's in a different universe, fortunately. But there are things that Abrams did right, in my opinion, and I will talk about that when it comes to the original series Problem. Not most of what he did, but some of the things he's doing visually were the right things to do. Perot's costumes, well, they're great as usual. I hadn't realized until I went to look for pictures of Alston Sage, as I did today, just how much that costume is intentionally cutting her to look very, very young and androgynous. Again, I assume that's why when she gets under the personal appearances now, she wants to show that stuff off, because she wants to show people she's not actually only 13 years old. One thing about it was, and I don't know whether or not to put this on makeup or costumes, or maybe both. When Bortus was in his space suit, it was quite clear that he was only wearing his makeup from about the shoulders up. You know, usually his body is significantly farther out in his uniform. It's much broader shoulders and like that. Now, we got into those spacesuits, and it was quite clear that it was only wearing this part. He seemed smaller from there down. Don't know whether or not to blame that on costumes or to blame that on makeup. Maybe just a combination of both. I don't know. But I did notice that. And his costumes still do suffer from the original series Problem that I'll talk about. Makeup. There really isn't anybody specifically mentioned here. It is a team of people. I do have to always admire the Mocklin makeup because it really holds up well in 1080p, which is tough on a television schedule. If you watch any of the like remastered next gen, you know, bring those up to 1080p, oh God, do you see the seams and stuff in Worf's makeup? It was never designed to be viewed under that level of resolution. It's the same like the original series. Can you now see the makeup lines and stuff? Yeah, absolutely. But that was, you know, low def, 640 by 480 at best, broadcast television, you know, and it sucked. So now they're doing makeup that must hold up under 1080p, and I always admire that Mocklin makeup. I can look at those faces and very rarely see a line. I have started to pick it up under the noses now, but it's not constant. It actually tells me when in the daytime that was probably shot. You know, if you've got the stuff spirit gummed down over your face and you spend 4 or 5 hours shooting, some of it's going to start to come up and they have to, you know, patch it back down. So when you see that, probably means it was shot later in the day. But it does hold up very, very well in 1080p. You don't see the lines for the most part, 99%. Next Gen had good surround sound. Yeah, the only problem with Next Gen is in terms of that was they took... For some reason, Berman thought that the music should be understated, and that is a next-gen problem that this show has. And I'll talk about it when I get to the original series Problem, which I'm about to get to. It suffers from that a lot. Next-gen and Berman-era Star Trek had very understated scores, and that sucks. Especially on this show. And I'll talk about it. Well, I'll talk it right about now. The original series Problem. The original series was dialogue heavy. This was because original series came from Get to it already, yes. The original series came from a period that was the fairly early days of television. And at that time, there were producers and writers who had come out of the radio era. And radio is, by nature, much more dialogue heavy. I am a huge audiophile, a big fan of what they call old-time radio, which is radio programs made from basically the turn of the century up until 1950s or so, with some that went afterwards. So I'm very, very familiar how good audio drama works in terms of how it tells a story. And some of that bled over into the original series because of the time period in which it operated. And additionally, original series intentionally courted literary science fiction authors because at that time, science fiction literature fans were dominant. They were the fandom. And it boosted the original series' credit in fandom of that era to have science fiction writers. However, writers like that write words, where video is a visual medium. Half your story should be visual. You should be telling your story with what you see, especially with today's CGI. So original series was very dialogue heavy. It was also, Star Trek is and has always leaned to. Yeah, Gunsmoke was a radio series. Absolutely. Yeah, there were all kinds of them that made the hop over. But Gunsmoke is certainly probably the most popular one from radio that made the leap over. Star Trek in general is always leaned towards the side of what we call hard science fiction. The difference between hard science and soft science fiction would be, Star Trek has always been hard science, and that means we spend time talking about the scientific stuff going on and explaining to the viewer how this or that other thing works. And the reason that we had to have this show really started out as hard science was because those literary fans of that era, and they were extreme sticklers for detail. If you were going to throw a universe like Star Trek's at them, it had to make internal sense. And so, for example, just an example of how much of a stickler they were for detail at that time. After writing his rather amazing novel, Ringworld, Larry Niven was greeted at the next con that he was a guest at with a big banner which read, "The Ringworld is unstable," that was held up by a bunch of MIT students who'd done the math and proved that Niven's Ringworld had an unstable rotation. And so Niven then went on to write the sequel, The Ringworld Engineers, in which he specifically addressed this problem of the Ringworld's unstable rotation. Warp drive makes sense. Well, oddly enough, I'm about to speak about that. Specifically, great minds think alike. In that era, you couldn't just wave your hand at warp drive. It was a matter-antimatter reactor. Got it. That makes perfect sense. Dilithium crystals, however, were the key to making it work. Now, this was largely scientifically accurate in as much as the only thing that can, at our present level of technology, the only thing we can imagine that would power a faster-than-light drive would be something horrifyingly large, in terms of energy production, like a matter-antimatter reactor. We don't have dilithium. That was the bit of hand-wavium that they threw at it and said, it's the one key ingredient that makes it all work. But because they were showing us a notion of a faster-than-light travel that made some sense and was internally consistent about how it worked with the power that it had, literary fans of that time let it go by. So in reality, in real science, no faster-than-light drive makes sense at all. You can theorize some ways to do it, but those ways that you can do it are so far beyond what we can do technologically that it doesn't matter. If you're going to have interstellar travel that isn't going to be, years, decades, hundreds of years in the making, you have to say, there's some kind of faster-than-light drive. Don't look over here too closely at it. There is no science fiction where that kind of drive makes a hell of a lot of sense in real science. So the science fiction fans of that time would allow you to do the warp drive that way. They would say, okay, it makes sense on the surface. We'll go ahead and let you have that little bit of hand-wavium with dilithium crystals. So. Other things in the original series were the limited effects by today's standards. And I say by today's standards. simply because the special effects weren't capable of doing what modern CGI can do. In point of fact, they were absolutely groundbreaking at the time. But they were certainly like nothing like we could do today. And they were limited by what you're seeing here. A 6-foot model that was a beautiful model, by the way. It's now been restored and rests at the Smithsonian Institute National Air and Space Museum. Please go feel free to go get it, take a look at it. Yeah, Next Gen had a ship powered by a singularity. That was the Romulans. Yeah. A completely different way of doing it, which, if you don't look too hard at it, makes perfect sense. Yeah, okay. You could have a singularity running your faster-than-light drive. It'd be totally different, but yeah, you could do that. Again, we have a little bit of hand-wavium. You know, none of this really makes sense in the real world, but if you're going to have faster-than-light travel, then you need to have a little bit of hand-wavium. But again, all the special effects you're doing were limited by what you're seeing here. You know, you were limited by what you could do with the technology of that time. The special effects on Star Trek, much as people like to malign them today, were very groundbreaking at the time. They're just nothing like what we can do today. There was also limited direction and cinematography in the original series. While they made extremely good use of what they had, and sometimes it was awfully creative, the reality is that the camera technology of the time was looking like what I'm showing you here. That big, monstrous, heavy 35mm film camera rig could not go everywhere and do everything. If you were going to dolly that sucker, you had to lay down dolly track and make sure that it worked right. And they did. They oftentimes did. But you weren't going to pan that sucker everywhere and have it floating around the screen. It was impossible. The picture was largely static because you couldn't do any more. They were also limited by budget to some extent. Now, this was a pretty good budget for that era. It was about $190K per episode. If you translated that into modern dollars, it's about $3.3 million per episode. I couldn't find it, a specific figure, but I believe the Orville is probably somewhere between $3 and $5 million on their budget. So while the special effects, you know, and stuff, and the way the scenic design and all that looks kind of fake and hokey today, it was still the best estimation of the future that they could make from a 1960s perspective. I'll speak about that technology in a second, but you have to remember this was not intentionally bad. This was what they could think of from the 1960s. If you went back in time to the 1960s with no knowledge of what was the coming technologies, you would get it wrong too. Fan films, Larry says, as I said, are just as good as the pros in production quality. Yes, that's exactly the case. In their case, it's not so much of a problem because they're intentionally doing things that are aping some of classic Star Trek. Here it becomes more of a problem, in my opinion. Another thing you have to worry about, because in the original series, limited time. They were working on a very, very hard deadline at that time, 5 to 6 working days. And sometimes they would often run over to 7 days to make an episode. But 5 to 6 is what they were supposed to have. And it was a hard date. At one point in the original series, they actually ran so far behind that Gene Roddenberry was afraid that they would not be able to deliver an episode one week. Now, while that does not seem like a big deal today, that happens from time to time in television today. Back then, that was death. If you failed the whole point of a producer's job, the producer's job was to make sure that an episode showed up before they had to air it at the network. That was the producer's whole job. If you couldn't do that, if Roddenberry had actually gone to NBC and said, I'm not going to be able to make it this week, he would never have produced anything ever again, anywhere, for anyone. The producer's whole job was to make sure that that episode made it there on time and preferably under budget. So they had this problem. They were going to run an entire week late, and they were not going to have an episode. Roddenberry went to the guy at the studio, who was his superior, and said, "Oh my God, we got to tell the network." And he said, "No, we don't either. Do not say word one." And what they did was they sat down and they looked at the footage they had from the first pilot, The Cage, which had not aired and has a very different cast. And they said, "Okay, Gene, here's what we do. We build a framing story around that, and then we work that one in." So what they actually were then able to do was to create a 2-part episode where there had only been one, And the parts that they had to film were not an entire week long. So they ended up with 2 episodes handing off to the network when they thought they were going to have none. And so they wound up not only getting back on schedule, but in such a way that they could afford to, be a little behind. So that was an extremely tight date. They could not miss those dates at that time. Technology always dates. I've said it a million times before in my Monday reviews where I tend to review older films. Technology always dates. Always, 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 always. It doesn't matter what you think is really cool right now. When you come back in 15, 20 years or more, people are going to look at it and they're going to laugh. That's what Star Trek had. It's what everything has had. What science fiction, this, again, you have to remember, this was really what the best futurists of science fiction of that era, and some scientists, for that matter, thought that the future would look like. What they didn't foresee was that general-purpose computers would become so powerful and so small that in 50 years' time, every person would be owning more computing power than it took to put man on the moon, and it would be sitting in your pocket. They were never expecting anything that we have today. Larry says, yes, they could be preempted at any time, even though a new episode was ready to air. Yeah, they could. The network could preempt them all they wanted. But if you didn't have that episode ready for them to show, you were dead. You were completely lost as a producer. Completely. Producer's whole job at that point was to make sure that episode got there on time and preferably under budget. So what they could not see back then was what was going to happen with computing. If you asked me in the 1970s or even the 1980s, will you own a tricorder by the time you're 45 or 40? And I would have said, no, I'm never going to own a tricorder. I've been in this field for 40 years, and even I did not see that coming. So similarly, anything that we make today is going to prove completely inaccurate because there is something out there that we are not seeing. Just bank on it. There is something out there that we are not seeing. And then there's the fact that this was all essentially baked into Star Trek. Not just the original series, but baked into Star Trek. It came to define Star Trek from the first films through the entire Berman era. It was dialogue heavy, hard science heavy, sparse and sometimes unimaginative SFX, particularly on the Enterprise, given what CGI could do even then. Particularly on Enterprise, I mean, the TV series Enterprise. Given what CGI could do then, they should have been more creative. We didn't constantly need, for every ship, everywhere, basically 3 different angles from which to shoot the ship. That was dictated by the technology filming of the time. That was this. That's why we only had a few different angles of the Enterprise, because there's only so many places you can put a camera this size on a model like this and still have it work good. That is a 6-foot model back there. It's taking up a third of the entire back wall of the soundstage. You cannot put this camera onto that model in many different ways. This was completely baked into Star Trek. The limited direction in cinematography, well, the camera was static in the original series because they had these big, physical 35mm film cameras that were heavy. By comparison, today's modern digital cameras are tiny and capable of much, much more. And in any case, I recently discovered almost everything is achieved in post anyway. So do whatever you want to with this camera. There is a lot that you can do. Now, the solution to the original series problem. I'm going to walk through this episode in places. Just going to pull out some key moments, and I'm going to give you some examples of the original series problem and what one might have done instead if I were directing this particular episode. Establishing shots of the Orville. Most of the shots of the ship herself, when we are just seeing her in space and not doing anything crazy. like at the beginning and the end of the episode, before and after act breaks, commercial breaks, or shots that signify the passage of time. Tend to be variations on the original series, 2 to 3 or 4 establishing shots that were dictated by the technology of that era. There is no reason that you can't do something far more creative. And they did it, by the way, when the shuttle came in for a landing on this episode. They did. Very, very different there. Excuse me. But there's no reason that you cannot do what Abrams did in the movies. Now, I think those movies are flawed for different reasons, but he did successfully move Star Trek out of what had been a largely verbal, dialogue-heavy medium and into something that was more driven by what you see. It is something that Star Trek never did. They baked into the entire premise of Star Trek the way of doing things in the 1960s, even long after they didn't need to do it anymore. Yep, actors added in posts. Actors will be AI. Yeah, I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for that. It's only a matter of time. But everything's inserted in post now. The lighting is altered in post. Even if you're lighting a real thing on a set, they alter it in post. So embrace it, guys. Go crazy with the camera if you want to. Now, I can give you an example of where they might have done something different about this. If, when they go to land the shuttle on the planet. Okay, that's pretty cool. It was a breaking up planet. It was nice special effects and all that. But as always, they landed on a flat plane with the door that they needed to get into. Well, I would have tilted it 90 degrees so that they have to, we come in to land and we land a certain way. We land in the plane of the ship. But then for them, the moment they step out of it, the gravity changes 90 degrees. So they step out, we see this weird moment when they're 90 degrees to where we think they ought to be, and then the camera shifts so that they're now upright. And what had been a horizontally sitting shuttle is now pointed vertically or something like that. So that's the sort of thing that you can do. There's no reason that you have to have these things all in the same plane all the time. You can turn them 90 degrees. It's space, and we have the ability to do that with CGI. We're not limited by this big, giant model in the studio. CGI, we can do damn near anything, so why don't we? It is the original series problem. They have baked in the things that they did in the original series that were dictated solely by technical limitations of the time. There are background characters here. It's something, by the way, that they did frequently. Several directors on the original series did frequently, but not all of them consistently. And that is, you should allow your background characters to react to the foreground characters. There are, at any given time, 2 to 4 people on the bridge who are there for background purposes. They should be allowed to react to the foreground characters. The foreground characters are often the superior officers. Let them react when their superiors speak. It looks more human that way. They did do that to some extent in Star Trek, the original series. There's a character of Mr. Leslie, who is constantly being put into the background of various shots. This is a guy who, he always reacted to people. And it was a hideously funny thing to watch if you really get him to watch it. Because I have this feeling, if the Enterprise has a rumor mill in the original series, Mr. Leslie is the main guy. He's the guy who's, the characters will say, Kirk and Spock will be sitting there 4 feet away from him talking sort of hushed tones about how they're going to take the ship back in time. And here's the guy that's listening to this going, oh my God, you are not going to believe what they're going to do now. We're going backwards in time. I could just see it because he was reacting to them all the time. Let these guys react. It looks more human. Let them react to the people who are around them. Don't just have them sort of sitting there automatons and punching their consoles. Somebody down here is talking. They could turn and watch, and react. And maybe something funny is said, and they go, or something like that. Let them react in the background to what's going on. One of the biggest things, beware the static camera. Beware close-ups. Beware shot, reverse shot. Shot, reverse shot is where you have 2 people having a conversation. And say it's like this. I'm talking to a person. Let's see if I can get the cam angle right. I'm talking to a person this way, right? And so you'll do the shot over their shoulder of me. I'll do all my lines, etc. And then you flip it around. You put the camera behind me. And now you're shooting them talking to me this way. That is shot, reverse shot. It is that, close-ups, group shots. These are all things that are carryovers from a time when you had a camera like this that could not be moved very much. That is no longer the case. It is now the case that we have small digital cameras that can be doing anything. So let me give you an example of something I'm talking about. Instead of shot, reverse shot. There's a lot of shot, reverse shot in the scene where Bortus and his name now, the other guy, are having that conversation over breakfast, and their son is there. Okay, to me, the most important thing in that scene is the kid. Not them and their reactions, it's the kid. If the kid wasn't important, why would they put the kid in there? So instead of doing all those shot, reverse shot, I'd have done some dollying a bit. I would have done some dollying around the table and wound up behind the kid, with each character on either side of the screen and the kid's head in the foreground, moving back and forth as they have their argument. You can do this. It is not required that you sit your camera completely still all the time. I would have done this from the kid's perspective and use that movement, that dollying around from one to the other and then settling on the kid, as a dramatic way of telling the story in a visual sense. You need to save this close, static shots for very personal moments. Group shots have the same problems. Let me see if I've got something. Yeah, the group shots have the same problems. They'll take wide shots. You don't need to do wide shots. You needed to do wide shots when your camera was this big and weighed 500 pounds. Now the cameras can go anywhere. Let them go anywhere. You know, take them around. Instead of seeing a big group shot of your crew, wander that camera around as they say their lines. They do it all the time in other television. It is something that was baked into the original series. Particularly when you get on major sets, particularly the bridge. Most of the time that camera can be constantly in motion, instead of moving from 2 shots to close-ups and to wide shots and all that. Instead, we can move from character to character. So for example, in the one scene when they find that ore on the planet, right? Instead of doing close-ups of people or 2 shots or wide shots, instead, I would maybe try this. Start out from an angle from the door of the bridge facing forward. So we're seeing everything on those windows. You know, this whole planet's tearing itself apart. We can just let that run. And we can foreshadow this discovery to some extent, right? So we got this big wide shot. We can see the front of the bridge and people at stations. And so over here at Isaac's station, we might have a couple of those background people who are starting to get more animated and excited. It's like, oh my God, what have we just found here? And then turn to Isaac, and then he can say something. But by having it in this big shot, then we can say, okay, over here we've got some stuff going on. Let's move in toward that. You keep then Isaac on one side of the screen, Ed on the other side of the screen while they have their exchange about this. And if you need to get reactions from somebody, you know, like at one point Gordon says, you know, wow, free gas. He can turn 90 degrees so we can see the profile of his face down farther in the bridge. But this gives us the ability to give us this very, very cool, generally ongoing panoramic shot of the special effects of this thing breaking up. And that would also underscore what they're being told. Look at that mess out there. Can we actually pick up what we need out of there? That's the sort of thing you can do. You do not have to go shot, reverse shot, close-up, 2-shot, group shot. You can move the camera around. The fact that they don't is because it was baked into Star Trek so bad that even now when you can do those things, it doesn't occur to anybody to actually do it. Action scenes, in particular, can move a lot. Now, let me give you an example here of where Bortus was revived in sickbay, because they had the right idea there. I was immediately struck by it. The cam faded in on the door, and then Ed and Kelly strode in, and the cam starts this nice dolly around the operating room table. But then it's interrupted with a quick dolly the other direction, and then shots, close-up shots of people. Not the way I would have done it. Might have worked better is when Ed and Kelly come in, the dolly follows through with them. Then we can see the operating room table, and the cam can do a complete dolly around the table in one direction. And as the thing is going around, well, we've also got these green shirts in the background, right? Where that's just there to make it look busy, but it doesn't really work because all they do is just kind of move around in the background. Instead, I'd have 3 green shirts and no nurse. And that thing over Bortus should be capable of making injections that she wants and doing everything the nurse was doing. And she could, Claire could then be looking over the readouts on that thing as opposed to looking at her handheld. Why do that when you got a big thing full of readouts? And we can have the people in the background moving from station to station or sharing information or doing specific things. But we can have them coming in between the camera and its dolly. And that way it really does look like something's busy is going on. And what I would have things do is Claire is the one sitting there on that thing. The green shirts are moving around and occasionally getting in the camera's frame and going out again. But when she gives them some type of order, then we see a reaction from them. Maybe we see some additional movement from them. But having the camera be static is not something we need to do. We might even go so far in that sickbay thing as to choose, say we got these 3 green shirts. Let's put them in charge of different aspects of the body. So there's somebody there for cardiology, there's somebody there for neurology, somebody there for respiratory, something like that. So when Claire says that she wants to have a cardio stimulator, well, we get the person who's in charge of cardio to do that. You know, she's down there going, cardio stimulator, bam, cardio stimulator, bam, and we can get the reactions and we can get the camera moving with them. We don't have to sit here on things that are dictated by a 1960s technology. You can use cameras in a more modern way in Star Trek. There's no reason not to. And then I would end the dolly. If I was going to do it with the dollying around the camera and getting, Claire's yelling things at different people who are then performing the orders that she wants, I would then settle in on a close-up of Bortus's face with, again, one shot here. We've just been dollaring around. And then wind up at Bortus's face while she's doing the whole defib. Do not cut away from that. Wind in up there and then, okay, cortical stim, or whatever it was, cardio stim, clear, ding, clear, ding, and then he wakes up. Don't break it up with all that other stuff. Don't go static. When you have an action sequence like that, it's perfectly fine to keep the camera moving. The reason that you got those static shots in the original series was because of this. We don't have that anymore. There's no reason to do it. Other shows are constantly doing this type of thing. There's no reason you can't do it here. Today, most of this stuff should be in motion, unless it is a really intense personal moment. You save this stuff for personal moments, not for action moments, but for personal moments. You can have personal moments come out in the middle of action. But for the most part, we want to take advantage of the fact that we've got 2019 technology. You don't have to think about this in terms of what did they do in Star Trek. Other pieces that are affected by the original series problem. Music. And this is to some extent, as I mentioned, a Berman-era Star Trek problem. For some reason, they decided, and you can tell the difference instantly, by the way, if you watch a few episodes of the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation versus later on in the Berman era, you will hear it instantly. They toned down all of the soundtracks. Guys, do not be afraid to be big on this show. You can think about being as big as Murray Gold doing Doctor Who big. That will work on this show. That was another thing that I liked, what was going on with the music during the background in sickbay. I watched that scene several times because the beginning of it I thought they got totally right. The camera was moving, we had a good performance out of Kelly, and the music in the background was good. It was, I was listening to it on the big speakers. It was very good. I like that very much. Do not be afraid to keep doing that. There was also some ticking countdown stuff going on in the music towards the end. Do not be afraid to do that. Do that all the time. Make it bigger. On this one, the original series scores are a very good thing to emulate, and don't be afraid to do it. The technobabble. Keep it to a minimum. Now, I know that's tough for a hard science fiction show like this, but it can get out of control. And when it does, I think what you need to have, because you can do this in a comedy sort of like this, Mercer can just say, hey, wait a minute, slow down, put that to me in Captain Dummy talk. And then the viewer will get what they need to know, and it can be scientifically accurate. They just don't need to get in excruciating detail about it. And they won't get confused that way. They'll understand what's going on without getting confused. When it comes to the dated technology, said technology always dates. There is nothing you can do about it. We are looking forward as best we can from where we are right now, but we're going to get it wrong. We are going to get it wrong. And this show is in danger of becoming very dated very quickly. They need to be using something like holodisplays, or better, everywhere. And they should have physical controls for emergency backup, which would have worked here, by the way, and been more dramatic. Because there's a point at which Malloy says, Captain, we've lost helm control. All right. Okay, what we should see then, if you're using holodisplays and everything that he's manipulating in the air, for the most part, then what we should see is the holodisplays go dark, and he starts using physical controls with buttons and switches, because that's what you need in something like a helm of a starship. If things go completely south and your cool displays aren't working, you need buttons and switches. So imagine the change in dramatic tone by virtue of he's fooling around as usual with all the stuff in front of him, and then it's all gone, just disappears into midair, and he's got nothing left. Oh my God, Captain, we've just lost helm control. And then he starts messing with the physical controls. Maybe there's a joystick. So it can make the scene even more dramatic by when that stuff just poof disappears, when it's not working and you have to resort to physical controls. But by having ocudograms, which is what they've basically got now, they're going to date very badly very quickly, because we are about to move beyond that technology. We are probably not moving into holodisplays. What we are probably moving into are displays that only you will see. We'll be wearing something like data shades, data contact lenses, in which we will see windows and applications up in our fields of view that no one but us can see. That's where we're probably headed for. That's frankly what I would be aiming for if I were doing something like that on this show. That with the backup of actual physical controls. Larry says, steering wheel. I don't know necessarily you'd use a steering wheel. In point of fact, you might have it come down to be he'd pull out like a game controller. Because it's a comedy, you can do that to some extent. We say, joysticks, old school, game controller type of thing. Something like that. But it would work out well in terms of it being, an emergency thing where we have to have our, sorry, I'm trying to hook this back on, where we have to have our manual controls. But if they stay with the flat surface computer displays, they're going to look very, very dated very quickly. We're about to move beyond that. That is my general suggestion for them. Stop thinking in terms of Star Trek, the original series. You can still tell great stories. Don't get me wrong. You don't really have to change the stories. All you have to do is different types of direction, different types of cinematography, taking advantage of what the camera can do now as opposed to what it could do in 1966. You have to acknowledge the fact that things have moved on, and I think you can make a more exciting show that way. And at the same time, particularly the music, I would really like to see the music get bigger. There's no reason you can't on this show. Go for it, guys. Let your composers off the leash, Excuse me. Not a steering wheel necessarily, although it might be amusing. Maybe for a helmsman. It would be kind of silly because of the three-dimensional. But I did get a kick out of in Star Trek 6 when the Klingons have an actual wheel by which they helm the ship. I don't know necessarily you could get away with that. A spaceship's got a Y and a Z axis, X, Y, and Z axis, as opposed to just X and Y. But you could do something like I say with a joystick or even a game controller. I could see that. So that's largely the review. We can ask ourselves, is it any good? Well, it was pretty good. I could have gone the rest of my life not knowing the details of Bortus's porn. And knowing it does, in fact, detract from my enjoyment. I was felt a little uncomfortable and unsettled when I left. Larry says, like in an airplane. Yeah, like in an airplane. You don't see these. It would be something like maybe on the console in front of him, It's normally flat with something on it, but when it all goes away, it just disappears in the air. He unhooks something and flips over a tabletop or slides it off or something, and there's all the manual controls. So there was some humor here, but not amazingly funny. The better part of the humor, I gotta say, I think the porn was supposed to be funny, but it wasn't to me. It was just uncomfortable. So the humor that's in there, like Ed reacting is like, why can't I be on a ship with normal people? That's the sort of humor I find funny in these circumstances, not knowing all about Bortus's porn. As I say, I'm starting to see a lot of what I call the original series problem. Please don't do that, guys. You are not making a TV show in the 1960s. Yes, you're making kind of an homage, but you're not making one in the 1960s. You can do visually interesting stories. You do not need to keep to the filmmaking techniques of the 1960s because it is 2019. Our cameras are tiny. They are high resolution. They can go anywhere and do almost anything. Your lighting, most of your effects, a bunch of your sets are being achieved in post anyway. If you don't have 4 walls in which to do a dolly in sickbay, no problem. Put up a green screen on any walls you don't have, and you can put anything that you want back there. It is not 1969. It is 2019, and there is no reason that you can't tell a visual story, even with something that is essentially Star Trek. That would be the review. It's pretty good. Just go in knowing that you're going to learn the details of somebody's porn, and it may make you uncomfortable. So, I guess that's pretty much the review. I'm not going to do anything in terms of current events on the mini review shows here. Expect some of that on Monday. Speaking of which, I might do a little bit of ad copy in the immortal style of Ernie Anderson, one of those voiceover guys from the 1980s and 70s or so. Monday on Tales from SYL Ranch. One of the sons of Frankenstein finds his father's monster in a coma and revives him. Now he discovers that the monster is controlled by Igor, who is bent on revenge. That's January 7th on the Fandi Masters 80th Anniversary Review of The Son of Frankenstein. Then, next Friday, on Tales from SYL Ranch, new missions, epic adventures. Now, Ed, Gordon, and Alara visit Alara's home planet of Zalea. That's next Friday on the Fandi Masters mini-review of the Orville, Season 2, Episode 3, Home. And if you guys could maybe find me a better synopsis to read from, that whole sentence was the one thing they said about this thing in their advertising copy. Thanks, guys. In any case, my show here is live. Tales from SYL Ranch is live on YouTube Mondays and Fridays in North America at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Pacific. And if you're working off of UTC, that'll be 2 a.m. the following morning. Upcoming reviews past this Monday. Of course, Fridays I'm doing mini review of the Orville as I'm doing now. That's until the series ends, and I am considering things that I might be able to do so that I can move these things onto Thursdays. Now, the interesting thing is the screener for this became available the moment that it started airing at 9 p.m. Eastern. I'm not quite sure what to do there, but it did become available, amazingly enough. I was watching it within moments of it having actually started airing. I was watching a 1080p screener. Amazing to me. But I'm trying to think of ways that maybe I can get that to work on a Thursday. I don't know. We'll see. Mondays then after Son of Frankenstein on January 14th, because I did a glowing review of Superman, the movie from 1978. I'm going to do a retro review of the terrible 1984 film Supergirl rather, which, as I've said before on other occasions, for some weird reason, I do have some emotional good feelings about, even though I know from any objective way to look at that film, it's pretty damn terrible. January 21st, I will be starting in with some fan films. I'll be doing Starship Farragut Episode 1, The Captaincy. And I will be attempting to do at least one fan film per month, which I will start with the exit with Starship Farragut and filling other schedule holes. So I'm going to try to get it at least once a month, maybe more than that, depending on what my scheduling holes look like. January 28th, I'm doing a retro review of King Kong from 1938. February 4th, I'll be doing a 60th anniversary review of First Man into Space. February 11th, I then have a 60th anniversary review of The Cosmic Man, which I have certainly never seen either. There's a full schedule on the website, www.wrstone.com, and if you click on Show Schedule, you will see a calendar there. If you click on any given item on the calendar, I do attempt to make some attempt to find a place that maybe you can watch this free of charge somewhere on the internet. Supergirl movie considered schlock? Oh, probably so. Yeah. It's probably just schlock. Yeah. It was one of those ones, again, where you're going into it with a lot of pretty talented people, but your script is terrible. And if you don't have a script, it doesn't matter who you put in front or behind the scenes. So yeah, it's kind of... Oh, I'm sorry, King Kong's 1933. You're absolutely right. If I said something else, I shouldn't have. 1933. Again, there's a schedule on the website. Feel free to go there and to click the schedule. And if you click any given link, you may very well attempt, certainly within a week or so of the review, try to find some place that you can watch it for free. So, that said, I might ask something a little bit like this for the first time in several weeks.
Hey, pardon me, but could you help out a fellow American who's down on his luck? Hit the road!
So if you like what I'm doing, please like, sub, tell all your friends, family, neighbors, and pets and livestock to do the same. Empire State Building just opened in 1932. Oh, I didn't know that. That's kind of cool. No wonder they used it. No wonder they used it. If you'd like to contribute to me, I do have a link for my PayPal tip jar. You can also visit my website where there's a contributions page, which includes an Amazon wish list that, among other things, includes a laptop that will make all of my technical problems disappear instantly. And if you buy it for me, you become the program director of my show. You can tell me exactly what movies to review and in what order. If you don't want to buy that, well, any contributions that you make toward me are going towards that laptop, ultimately. And again, you can see that on my website at www.wrstone.com. I would certainly thank all of my viewers who have contributed, at least one of whom is watching me right now. And so I appreciate you doing that on two levels, as I've said many times in the past. The first level is that I can maybe use this towards getting something that's going to make the show better. The second level is just the fact that anybody would pay me to do this at all is a big kick for me. So thank you. In the immortal words of Elvis Presley, oh, thank you. Thank you very much. So I guess that is probably all the time that we have today, boys and girls. Only did an hour and a half, so that's good. Tune in again on Monday for my 80th anniversary review of Son of Frankenstein. Until then, this is Tales from SYL Ranch, the vlogcast that reminds you to always know where your towel is. And I'm your host, Bill Stone.
Ultimate power in this world has always been one simple thing: the control and manipulation of minds.